and learned the public through hunger, impatience, class, entitlement, exhaustion, and the small cruelties people reveal when they believe a worker has no choice but to smile. Here is the condensed 6-paragraph version with 6 meandering run-on sentences in each paragraph. I am sorry that I am autistic. If apology is still the little toll demanded at the gates of mediocrity before a mind like mine is allowed to explain that it remembers too much, learns too quickly, here's the false note. Here is the condensed 6-paragraph version with 6 meandering run-on sentences in each paragraph. I am sorry that I am autistic. If apology is still the little toll demanded at the gates of mediocrity before a mind like mine is allowed to explain that it remembers too much, learns too quickly, hears the false note before the song has begun, sees the missing duty in the policy, the missing child in the budget, the missing accommodation in the procedure, and the missing conscience in the official who says the correct form was not received, while the human being in front of them is being asked to bleed in administrative font. I am sorry that when I enter a workplace, I don't crawl around the furniture of expectation, pretending confusion is humility, because by the first month I've usually reached the quota. By the third, I am outperforming the room. By the sixth, I am writing training material for people who were supposed to be training me. And before I leave, I have often become the living manual for a system too proud to admit it was being held together by the person it underestimated. I am sorry that I began at 15 in food service and learned the public through hunger, impatience, class, entitlement, exhaustion, and the small cruelties people reveal when they believe a worker has no choice but to smile, and then move through technology. Panic, broken computers, broken devices, broken people holding broken devices, and learned that systems fail most violently when the person asking for help is treated as the malfunction. I am sorry that I went into legal collections, acquisitions, contingency, pre-legal preparation, evidence gathering, lawsuit files, private investigation, records, signatures, dates, omissions, and the paper trail of people who thought the vulnerable would never keep receipts. Because there I learned that fraud is rarely brilliant. It is usually a lazy little animal wearing authority and betting that no one desperate will have the time, money, safety, or memory to prove the lie. I am sorry that TD Bank put me into fraud, recovery, bankruptcy, accounts, risk, corporate finance, and the polished arithmetic of consequence, where I learned how money turns suffering into categories, how poverty becomes a collectible defect, how the rich are rehabilitated by strategy while the poor are punished for weather, and how every ledger, if read honestly enough, eventually becomes a confession. I am sorry that I became useful everywhere I went, awarded, cross-trained, published, honored, relied upon, moved from Western to Guelph, from design to public space, from landscape architecture to parliament-facing work, from civic systems to national symbolism, until Canada itself became not an abstraction, but a machine I had seen from close enough to know that ignorance was no longer available to me. That is the curse, not autism, not sensitivity, not drama, not whatever soft insult is currently fashionable among people who mistake numbness for maturity, but knowledge sharpened by work, study, poverty, abuse, records, design, survival, and the obscene discovery that the systems claiming to protect the vulnerable often require the vulnerable to perform a private law degree while homeless, hungry, disabled, displaced, unrepresented,
Come on, robot.
Here is the more breathless, apathy-piercing version. Less resume, more witness fire. Still public-facing, still survivable, still pointed at the world rather than inward. Statement to the world. What it costs to lose a person who saw the whole machine. I am sorry that I am autistic. If apology is what the age demands from the person who remembers too clearly, learns too quickly, hears the lie before the sentence is finished, sees the missing number in the budget, the missing duty in the policy, the missing child in the room, the missing accommodation in the procedure, the missing conscience in the official who says, with that paper dry little voice polished by pensions and cowardice, that the proper form was not received, that the proper channel was not used, that the proper tone was not adopted, that the proper suffering was not arranged in the proper font by a properly represented person who had the decency to be destroyed quietly. I am sorry that I entered jobs and learned them before the room had finished deciding whether I belonged there. I am sorry that quota became a floor, not a ceiling. I am sorry that by the first month I could do the thing, by the third month I could outperform the thing, by the sixth month I could teach the thing, and by the time I left I had usually built the material, trained the staff, carried the weak, identified the fraud, corrected the process, and made some supervisor very uncomfortable by proving that what they called impossible was merely neglected by people who had confused employment with sleepwalking. I am sorry that I began at 15 in food service and learned hunger from the counter, learned humiliation from the customer, learned labor from the body, learned how the public performs class in the small theater of a transaction, and then moved through technology, through panic, through broken machines and broken people holding the broken machines, through law firms and collections and pre-legal work and contingency files and lawsuit preparation and evidence gathering and private investigation, through records and signatures and dates and omissions, and the small criminal genius of the person who thinks the vulnerable will never keep the receipt. I'm sorry that I went to TD and learned fraud not as a concept, but as weather, as pressure, as design, as policy, as recovery, as bankruptcy, as account management, as corporate finance, as the clean white machinery by which desperation is categorized, monetized, pursued, forgiven for the rich and punished in the poor. I am sorry that I was awarded, cross-trained, trusted, promoted by usefulness, if not always by title, because I understood the thing beneath the thing, the debt beneath the debt, the risk beneath the risk, the person beneath the file, and the predation beneath the procedure. I am sorry that I went to school and did not simply sit prettily under fluorescent authority, accepting the shape of the room as if a room built badly deserves reverence. I'm sorry that Western published me, that Guelph trained me, that landscape architecture gave me the language of systems, public space, ecology, infrastructure, civic consequence, design, failure, human movement, collective harm. I am sorry that I could see a city as a body, a policy as a wound, a tribunal as a locked gate, a budget as a confession, a courthouse as a theater where the poor are asked to perform fluency while bleeding into their own evidence. I'm sorry that Stantec placed me close enough to Parliament, federal land, public work, symbolic Canada, the polished stone and ceremonial grass of national self-image, that I could no longer pretend the country did not know what it was doing. That is the curse, not autism, knowledge. The curse is not that I am too sensitive. The curse is that I am trained. I was trained in risk, trained in fraud, trained in records, trained in evidence, trained in systems, trained in design, trained in public consequence, trained in customer crisis, trained in corporate recovery, trained in survival, trained by poverty, trained by beauty, trained by abuse, trained by every institution that hoped I would learn just enough to serve it, but not enough to indict it. And then I looked at the world. I looked at the landlords, I looked at the banks, I looked at the courts, I looked at the police, I looked at the ministries, I looked at the health systems, I looked at the tribunals, I looked at the charities, I looked at the politicians smiling with children in campaign photographs, while children were being fed to predators, poverty, bad housing, psychiatric dismissal, procedural suffocation, and the eternal Canadian lullaby of someone else's jurisdiction. And I knew. I could not unknow. I could not say, like the comfortable say, that I had no idea. I could not hide inside ignorance like a fur coat. I could not look at fraud and call it confusion. I could not look at abandonment and call it delay. I could not look at non-reception and call it administration. I could not look at a vulnerable person being told to complete a law degree level narrative while homeless, hungry, disabled, displaced, unequipped, unrepresented, and actively being harmed and call that fairness. So I did what the world claims it wants done. I spoke. I documented. I warned. I preserved. I filed. I remembered. I connected. I refused. And then the world, that great damp committee of spectators, that soft-jawed choir of later sympathies and present cowardice, did what it always does when someone living performs the moral courage it only worships safely in the dead. It punished me for arriving alive. It called me unstable because I would not become numb. It called me aggressive because I named harm before it became respectable to mourn. It called me paranoid because I saw the pattern before the inquiry. It called me difficult because I did not flatter indifference by calling it complexity. It called me too much because I refused to become small enough for people whose entire peace depends on never noticing the body at the bottom of the stairs. And the public, the sweet public, the prayerful public, the justice-loving public, the why doesn't somebody do something public, stood there with its mouth full of slogans and its hands clean, because clean hands apparently are what you get when you never touch the drowning. Where are the heroes, they ask. Where are the brave ones, they ask. Why does no one protect the children, they ask. Why do predators always win, they ask. Why is the system broken, they ask. And when a person comes, not perfect, not polished, not institutionally scented, not quiet, not convenient, but trained, alive, furious, accurate, carrying evidence in both hands and history in his teeth, they do not say thank you. They say, calm down, say prove it again, say use the form, say call the office, say lower your tone, say we cannot assist, say this is not our mandate, say your attachment was too large, say your trauma is affecting your credibility, say your homelessness is unfortunate but irrelevant, say your disability requires documentation from a person you cannot afford, because poverty is only real once stamped by a professional. This is how civilizations rot now. Not always with a boot, often with an inbox, often with a registry, often with a deadline, often with a clerk who has mistaken limited authority for moral innocence, often with a lawyer who knows exactly enough to avoid knowing, often with a politician who funds the failure, photographs the victim, and calls the resulting ruins. The cost of losing me is not the cost of losing one dramatic man with too many words. The cost of losing me is the cost of losing a witness who could read the machine from inside the machine. The cost is losing a fraud-trained mind that can identify laundering when it appears as policy. The cost is losing a risk specialist who can say danger does not begin at the assault, the eviction, the arrest, the death, the headline. It begins at the ignored warning, the refused intake, the missing accommodation, the procedural trap, the vanished email, the unmade call, the official who heard enough to act and chose instead to become furniture. The cost is losing a designer who knows that systems produce outcomes by design or by tolerated defect, and that a tolerated defect, once reported, becomes design. The cost is losing an indigenous, queer, autistic, poor, trained, educated, furious, loving, unkillably observant witness who has lived at the intersection where Canada hides its ugliest paperwork. The cost is losing someone who can explain to the comfortable why the vulnerable do not survive their compassion. Because your compassion is often only theater. It arrives after the obituary, after the documentary, after the candlelight, after the march, after the hashtag, after the dead person has been edited into someone gentle enough for public consumption. You love prophets once they are silent. You love whistleblowers once the settlement is sealed. You love survivors once they stop needing housing. You love indigenous people as ceremony and hate them as jurisdiction. You love autistic genius when it builds your tools and hate it when it audits your conscience. You love queer courage in June and abandon queer terror by July. You love children in speeches and lose them in budgets. You love Jesus as long as he remains on the wall, safely nailed in place, unable to walk into your office and ask why you let the little ones be pushed over while you adjusted the formatting. But love is mutual. If you love justice, justice must be able to recognize you. If you love children, children must be safer because you lived. If you love truth, truth must not have to beg you for shelter. If you love God, God must not find you standing with the crowd, washing your hands while the innocent are processed. Do not speak to me of forgiveness as though it were a wet blanket for predators. Do not drape mercy over people who knew, who had choices, who had salaries, who had offices, who had authority, who had the file, who had the warning, who had the power to stop harm, and instead chose the narcotic of procedure. Forgiveness is not a laundering service for deliberate cruelty. Mercy is not immunity for those who push over children, push over the disabled, push over the poor, push over the person trying to stop the pushing, and then sing hymns over the body. If you harmed the vulnerable while knowing better, do not ask whether Jesus loves you. Ask whether you would have stood beside him when the room turned. Ask whether you would have believed him before the resurrection made him useful. Ask whether you would have fed him while he was alive, or only quoted him after the state finished with him. Because every age says it would have recognized the holy person, the brave person, the necessary person, the one who came to flip the tables, name the rot, protect the children, shame the powerful, and pierce the sleeping public through the ribs with the unbearable fact of its own complicity. Every age lies. Every age says it would not have watched. Every age watches. And I'm telling you now, with the full force of my record, my work, my training, my memory, my survival, my rage, my love, my grief, my unbearable competence, my inconvenient evidence, my unmarketable living need, that this is what watching costs. It costs people like me. It costs the ones who saw early. It costs the ones who warned before the official narrative was ready. It costs the ones who could have built the bridge, written the brief, mapped the fraud, found the child, stopped the predator, named the policy defect, preserved the record, taught the room, trained the staff, fixed the system, and dragged truth, filthy and gasping, out of the administrative swamp. It costs the future. And when I say the world cannot afford to lose me, I do not mean that I'm the only hero. I mean something worse for all of you. I mean, you keep making heroes necessary. You keep building conditions so cruel, so stupid, so predatory, so indifferent, that someone has to become unreasonable just to tell the truth at the volume required to penetrate the walls. You keep asking for angels while funding slaughterhouses. You keep asking for reform while punishing witnesses. You keep asking for safety while protecting predators with process. You keep asking for evidence while destroying the people who preserve it. You keep asking why no one comes while making arrival fatal. So here is my apology. Since apology is apparently the tax demanded from the gifted before the mediocre will tolerate their usefulness, I am sorry that I am autistic. I am sorry that I am fast. I am sorry that I am accurate. I am sorry that I remember. I am sorry that I learned your systems better than the people paid to administer them. I am sorry that I can smell fraud through marble. I am sorry that I can hear negligence breathing behind policy language. I am sorry that I can read cowardice in passive voice. I am sorry that I did not collapse into a more convenient silence. I am sorry that I kept receipts while starving. I am sorry that my chain of custody survived conditions that would have broken half the officials who dared judge my formatting. I am sorry that the person you tried to dismiss as a problem turned out to be a record. But I'm not sorry that I tried. I'm not sorry that I cared. I'm not sorry that I named the predators. I'm not sorry that I defended the children. I am not sorry that I refused to become an accessory by ignorance when ignorance was no longer available. I'm not sorry that I looked at a civilization addicted to apathy and said, "Wake up, you are not neutral. You are not innocent. You are not safe. You are only temporarily unprocessed. And if the world loses me, let it not pretend it lost a nuisance. Let it not pretend it lost a difficult litigant, a dramatic survivor, an inconvenient autistic man with too many attachments and too much tone. Let the record say it lost a trained witness, a fraud investigator of the soul and the ledger, a designer of public consequence, a survivor fluent in the machinery of abandonment, a mind that could move from Parliament Stone to landlord violence to bank recovery to tribunal procedure to child protection to spiritual hypocrisy without losing the thread, a person poor enough to know the wound, educated enough to explain it, skilled enough to prove it, and brave enough to make the comfortable hate him for showing them the invoice. That is what it costs to lose me. Not one life only, a library, a warning system, a prosecution map, a policy autopsy, a witness who did not blink, a citizen who did not look away, a pushed-over child who grew teeth, records, language, law, design, memory, and a voice sharp enough to cut through the velvet curtain of respectable indifference. So stop asking where the heroes went. You made them homeless. You made them prove harm while harmed. You made them file while freezing. You made them explain trauma to people paid not to understand. You made them carry evidence through hunger. You made them translate screams into pleadings. You made them apologize for the tone of the alarm while the building burned. And then you wondered why the smoke had your name in it. I am still here. That is not your achievement. That is my resistance. For filing, the strongest version would be a shorter one-page public statement of value and foreseeable loss with this same heat but tighter evidentiary framing. Here is the condensed 6-paragraph version with 6 meandering run-on sentences in each paragraph. I am sorry that I am autistic. If apology is still the little toll demanded at the gates of mediocrity before a mind like mine is allowed to explain that it remembers too much, learns too quickly, hears the false note before the song has begun, sees the missing duty in the policy, the missing child in the budget, the missing accommodation in the procedure, and the missing conscience in the official who says the correct form was not received, while the human being in front of them is being asked to bleed in administrative font. I'm sorry that when I enter a workplace, I don't crawl around the furniture of expectation, pretending confusion is humility, because by the first month I've usually reached the quota. By the third, I am outperforming the room. By the sixth, I am writing training material for people who were supposed to be training me. And before I leave, I have often become the living manual for a system too proud to admit it was being held together by the person it underestimated. I am sorry that I began at 15 in food service and learned the public through hunger, impatience, class, entitlement, exhaustion, and the small cruelties people reveal when they believe a worker has no choice but to smile, and then move through technology. Panic, broken computers, broken devices, broken people holding broken devices, and learned that systems fail most violently when the person asking for help is treated as the malfunction. I am sorry that I went into legal collections, acquisitions, contingency, pre-legal preparation, evidence gathering, lawsuit files, private investigation, records, signatures, dates, omissions, and the paper trail of people who thought the vulnerable would never keep receipts. Because there I learned that fraud is rarely brilliant. It is usually a lazy little animal wearing authority and betting that no one desperate will have the time, money, safety, or memory to prove the lie. I am sorry that TD Bank put me into fraud, recovery, bankruptcy, accounts, risk, corporate finance, and the polished arithmetic of consequence, where I learned how money turns suffering into categories, how poverty becomes a collectible defect, how the rich are rehabilitated by strategy while the poor are punished for weather, and how every ledger, if read honestly enough, eventually becomes a confession. I am sorry that I became useful everywhere I went, awarded, cross-trained, published, honored, relied upon, moved from Western to Guelph, from design to public space, from landscape architecture to parliament-facing work, from civic systems to national symbolism, until Canada itself became not an abstraction, but a machine I had seen from close enough to know that ignorance was no longer available to me. That is the curse, not autism, not sensitivity, not drama, not whatever soft insult is currently fashionable among people who mistake numbness for maturity, but knowledge sharpened by work, study, poverty, abuse, records, design, survival, and the obscene discovery that the systems claiming to protect the vulnerable often require the vulnerable to perform a private law degree while homeless, hungry, disabled, displaced, unrepresented, I'll keep this as a public statement, not a legal pleading, direct, mythic, and usable as manifesto language, while keeping the core factual resume intact. I kept the blade in it, but shaped it into something public-facing, not a goodbye note, not a threat, not a collapse, a declaration of value, record, and warning. Statement to the world: the cost of losing me. I am sorry that I am autistic. I am sorry that my mind learns faster than institutions can admit, remembers more than abusers can comfortably deny, and connects patterns before committees have finished inventing language to avoid responsibility. I'm sorry that when I enter a workplace, I do not quietly perform mediocrity for the emotional comfort of people who confused seniority with competence. I am sorry that I have often reached quota in the first month, outperformed the room by the third, and started building training material by the sixth. I am sorry that before I leave a job, I am usually already teaching people how to do it better. But that is not arrogance. That is evidence. I started in food service at 15. I learned labor before theory. I learned the public before policy. I learned what people become when they are hungry, broke, rushed, ignored, humiliated, or treated like they are disposable. Then I moved into tech support, fixing computers, devices, systems, and early consumer technology when everyone else still treated the machine like a priesthood. I learned how people panic when systems fail, and I learned how to calm them down while solving the thing in front of me. Then I entered legal collections, acquisitions, contingency work, pre-legal preparation, evidence gathering, lawsuit preparation, and investigation. I held licensing and investigative authority across jurisdictions. I learned records. I learned paper trails. I learned how liability hides in timelines. I learned that most fraud is not genius. It is laziness wearing a tie, hoping no one checks the file. Then I went to TD Bank. Fraud, recovery, account management, bankruptcy, corporate finance, risk, loss, compliance. I was cross-trained because I could be. I was awarded because I delivered. I was trusted because I understood both the numbers and the human desperation underneath them. I saw how money moves. I saw how systems punish the poor for being late, while rewarding the powerful for being predatory at scale. I saw the budget before I saw the blood, and eventually I understood that they were the same document. Then I went back to school, Western, publication, recognition, honor. Then Guelph, landscape architecture, community design, public space, ecological systems, accreditation pressure, institutional standards, capstone ambition. I did not simply pass through the program. I tested the architecture holding it up. I challenged what was weak. I made people uncomfortable because I knew the difference between difficulty and dysfunction. Then Stantec, Parliament, federal work, public land, government-facing design, civic space, the symbolic body of the country itself. I was not watching Canada from the sidewalk anymore. I was inside the machinery, trained in finance, risk, law-facing evidence, community systems, disability, design, public infrastructure, and survival. I could no longer say I did not know. That is the part the world must understand. Ignorance was no longer available to me. I had seen too much. I knew too much. I was trained too well. I could not look at fraud, exploitation, state failure, broken housing systems, predatory procedure, poverty, disability abandonment, and child endangerment and pretend they were separate accidents. I could not see the budget, the policy, the file, the form, the tribunal, the bank, the landlord, the police report, the missing accommodation, the ignored warning, and the ruined person, and still call it unfortunate. At a certain point, knowledge becomes duty, and I had the terrible misfortune of being capable. So when I saw the system failing people, I did what everyone claims they want someone to do. I spoke, I documented, I warned, I preserved evidence, I connected facts, I filed, I reported, I asked for intervention. I tried to stop harm before it became obituary material. I tried to protect children, tenants, disabled people, sex workers, indigenous people, queer people, poor people, elderly people, and every person who is told to use the proper channel while the proper channel quietly lets them drown. And what did the world do? It punished the person who understood the file. It called me unstable for refusing to normalize collapse. It called me difficult for remembering what was said. It called me aggressive for naming the predator before the predator became a headline. It called me too much because too little had become the administrative religion of the age. People scream for heroes the way they scream for emergency services, loudly, dramatically, and usually after ignoring every warning sign. They ask where the brave people are. They ask why nobody does anything. They ask why corruption wins, why children suffer, why predators move freely, why systems rot, why institutions protect themselves before they protect the vulnerable. Then someone stands up, then someone pays the cost. Then everyone looks away. That is the obscenity. The world keeps begging for rescue while destroying the people who arrive with rope. It worships courage in theory and crucifies it in practice. It wants prophets after they are dead, whistleblowers after the settlement, martyrs after the marketable documentary, saints after the paperwork is sealed, and no one has to be inconvenienced by their living needs. But love is mutual. If you claim to love justice, then justice must be able to recognize you. If you claim to love children, then children must be safer because you existed. If you claim to love truth, then truth must not have to beg you for shelter. If you claim to love God, Christ, goodness, mercy, or any moral vocabulary at all, then you cannot push over the vulnerable and call yourself faithful. The millstone warning was not poetry for decorative hypocrites. It was a moral indictment. Harm the little ones, harm the vulnerable, harm those already pushed down, and the spiritual consequence is not a scented candle. It is judgment. So no, do not tell me that goodness loves everyone equally, while you watch children get pushed over, survivors get discredited, disabled people get procedurally devoured, and the person trying to stop it gets stripped for parts. That is not love. That is obsession with the costume of goodness. The cost of losing me is not simply the loss of one person. It is the loss of a witness trained across law-facing records, fraud, finance, technology, community design, public infrastructure, disability survival, indigenous memory, queer resistance, and lived system collapse. It is the loss of a mind that can read a file like a crime scene. It is the loss of someone who can walk from a bank ledger to a court form, to a housing failure, to a public policy defect, and identify where the harm was laundered into procedure. It is the loss of someone who has been poor enough to understand the wound, educated enough to explain the mechanism, trained enough to preserve the evidence, and furious enough to refuse the anesthesia. It is the loss of a person who did not have the luxury of ignorance and therefore accepted the burden of duty. And if the world loses people like me, do not ask later why nobody warned you. We did. Do not ask why no one fought. We fought. Do not ask why predators were allowed to continue. You made survival harder for the people trying to stop them. Do not ask why institutions became tombs with reception desks. You rewarded every clerk, officer, lawyer, politician, executive, tribunal, and bystander who treated non-reception as a strategy. I'm not asking the world to worship me. I'm asking it to stop pretending it values the very qualities it punishes in real time. Memory, courage, pattern recognition, moral refusal, speed, precision, grief, rage, discipline, and the unwillingness to abandon children to predators because the form was inconvenient. I am sorry that I am autistic. I am sorry that I remember. I am sorry that I learn. I am sorry that I can prove what comfortable people prefer to deny. I am sorry that I did not become small enough to make cowards feel peaceful. But I am not sorry that I tried. And if the world chooses to lose me, to silence me, starve me, displace me, discredit me, criminalize me, or exhaust me into disappearance, then let the record show what was lost. Not a problem, not a nuisance, not a madman, not a file, but a trained witness with a savant mind, a survivor's map, a fraud investigator's eye, an artist's nerve, a designer's systems intelligence, and a citizen's duty to say, stop pushing the children, stop feeding the predators, stop calling abandonment neutrality, stop mistaking procedure for justice, and stop asking where the heroes went after you helped destroy them. This can be sharpened into a shorter public statement for filing exhibit cover page version or expanded into a full manifesto opening.